A young FBI agent, eager to prove herself, is thrust into a battle against corruption that runs deeper than she ever imagined. But when a racist, corrupt officer tries to undermine her at every turn, Mariana knows one thing for sure. She won't just fight for justice. She'll redefine it, no matter the cost. Will she survive the storm? Only time will tell. The precinct in New York was like a hive, buzzing with activity as new recruits filed in for their first day of training. The air smelled like coffee, old paperwork, and something else: tension. Agent Mariana stood at the back of the room, feeling every eye on her. She was an outsider in more ways than one. Born and raised in South Africa, she was used to being the new kid in town. But this was different. This was the FBI, and she had everything to prove. She adjusted her jacket, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to float like smoke in the room. Some were curious, others skeptical. Few were welcoming. She was young, she was from a faraway country, and worst of all, she was a woman in a field dominated by men. Today's briefing was more important than ever. The precinct was on high alert. Rumors swirled about a political lobbying group that had been funneling illegal money through the city for years. The group was smart. They used the precinct to launder cash, pulling in corrupt officers to turn a blind eye. These were criminals masquerading as law-abiding citizens, and it was Agent Mariana's job to stop them. But before she could dive in, Officer Patrick, a seasoned cop with an air of arrogance, spoke up. His gruff voice cut through the room like a knife. "So let me get this straight," he said, his eyes locking onto Mariana with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've got a rookie from South Africa here, trying to figure out the dirty politics of New York City. Do you even know how this game is played, rookie?" Mariana felt the room fall silent. The other officers exchanged glances, some smirking, others awkwardly shuffling in their seats. Patrick's words hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, thick and suffocating. She knew exactly what he was trying to do: undermine her in front of the entire room. But she wasn't about to let him rattle her. Keeping her voice calm and steady, she responded, "I've been trained to recognize corruption, sir, no matter where it hides. And believe me, it hides in the shadows here just as much as it does back home." Her words landed with a quiet force, but Patrick wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yeah. And what makes you think you can handle a case this big? You're just fresh off the boat, like some rookie starry-eyed dreamer." His words stung, but Mariana clenched her jaw and bit back the urge to lash out. She'd dealt with worse in her life. This was nothing compared to the battles she'd fought in South Africa. She forced herself to focus on the case at hand, pushing aside the insult. But as the briefing continued, it became clear Patrick wasn't just trying to poke at her pride. He was trying to sabotage her every step of the way. Each suggestion she made, each piece of evidence she put forward, was met with a dismissive sneer or a sarcastic comment. He was relentless, a bully with a badge. The tension in the room was palpable. Every time she presented a new lead about the political group, Patrick would find a way to question it, to twist it, to make her look foolish. But Mariana refused to back down. She saw the threads, the connections, the cracks in the wall of corruption. She knew the precinct was more than just a place of law enforcement. It was a breeding ground for illegal money, masked as business as usual. The deeper she looked, the more she could see the ties between the group and the officers who were supposed to protect the public. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. Mariana's first test wasn't just to solve the case. It was to survive Patrick's persistent undermining. She knew it would be a battle of wills. But she also knew she had something he didn't: resolve. And as she stared across the room at him, her mind set on the investigation ahead, she silently vowed to prove him wrong. To show him and everyone else that she wasn't just here to play by the rules. She was here to change them. The days following the tense briefing were a blur of cold coffee, endless paperwork, and late nights. Mariana, undeterred by Patrick's insults, threw herself into the investigation. With the help of a few trusted allies, a sharp detective named Marcus, and an old-school analyst, Sarah, she began to piece together a trail of dirty money that ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. They started small: phone records, bank statements, questionable connections between the political lobbying group and some key precinct figures. But soon, Mariana's sharp eyes began to connect the dots faster than anyone expected. She found a pattern where others saw only noise. A key phone call here, an off-the-record meeting there. It wasn't long before she began to uncover a web of corruption that implicated several officers, Patrick included. But as she closed in on the truth, the real battle began. Patrick wasn't just content with taunting her behind closed doors. He made it his mission to publicly undermine her at every opportunity. During team meetings, he'd shoot down her suggestions with mockery thinly disguised as concern. "Ah, rookie, I think you've missed something. It's cute that you're trying, but this is real life." His voice was smooth, like a snake, and his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of watching her squirm in front of the team. He was relentless. Every lead Mariana followed, Patrick was there, raising doubts, asking questions that cast shadows over her findings. "Are you sure about this? Maybe you should double-check. It's not like we're working with amateurs here." His words weren't just frustrating. They were dangerous. They sowed seeds of doubt among the team, making them question Mariana's every move. The older officers, who had been in the game for years, began to second-guess her conclusions. Their eyes flickered from her to Patrick, unsure of who to trust. Mariana wasn't blind to it. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Some of the officers were clearly siding with Patrick, thinking she was just a kid playing cop. Others were still on the fence, unsure whether to stand by her or back down in the face of his experience. Only Marcus and Sarah were unwavering, their faith in her growing, as they saw her logic unfold like a clear blueprint. But Patrick wasn't about to let her take credit for unraveling his network. Each day, he found ways to sabotage her work. He'd send her on dead-end errands, burying her in paperwork that led nowhere. When she would finally return, exhausted and frustrated, he would always be there with a smirk. "You look like you've had a hard day. Maybe you're just not cut out for this," he would say, dripping with condescension. And as always, he was there to offer his solution, one that never seemed to lead anywhere but back to square one. Yet, for every time he tried to trap her, Mariana found a way to fight back. She dug deeper, and every roadblock Patrick set up only led her to more incriminating evidence. She started to notice that some of the officers who were usually loyal to Patrick were starting to drift away, quietly questioning his motives. But it wasn't enough. The stress of constant undermining was starting to wear her down. The team was split. Some trusted her, others were still unsure. Even Marcus had begun to show signs of doubt, his loyalty to her wavering in the face of Patrick's experience and influence. Then came the day that broke her. It was another meeting, another round of Patrick's taunts. This time, he didn't just question her findings. He mocked her methods in front of everyone. "Come on, rookie, you're still doing it that way. This isn't a college class. You're supposed to be an agent, not some wide-eyed intern." The room went silent. Her pride, her professionalism, everything she had worked for was laid bare in front of the team. Patrick's voice was like a hammer pounding her resolve into the ground. She had been humiliated, and for a moment she felt the weight of his words. Heavy, suffocating. But then, something inside her shifted. Mariana realized this wasn't about proving herself to him. It wasn't about winning his approval, or even proving her worth to the skeptical officers who watched with bated breath. This was about exposing the corruption that had poisoned the precinct, the same corruption that endangered the people she was sworn to protect. Her voice came out quiet at first, but steady. "You're right, Patrick. I might be new. I might not have your years of experience. But what I do have is the truth. And the truth is, some of us in this room are on the wrong side of it." The room held its breath. Mariana didn't flinch as Patrick sneered at her. Instead, she met his gaze with calm intensity. She was no longer the rookie. She was a force, and she knew it. She had already uncovered too much, and she wasn't about to let him destroy everything she had worked for. With one last glance at the room full of skeptical eyes, she stood tall. "I'm done playing nice, Patrick. You might think you can tear me down, but I'm not going anywhere. This case is mine now. You'll either get on board or get out of my way." As she spoke, she saw the shift in the room, the smallest flicker of doubt in Patrick's eyes. She wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to expose the truth. And she was ready to do whatever it took. The days of quiet suspicion were over. Mariana's investigation had reached a boiling point, and she had uncovered something that shook her to the core. Officer Patrick was not just a bystander in the corruption. It was his fingerprints all over it. The bribes, the leaks, the whispers in the dark corners of the precinct. All of it traced back to him. The truth hit her like a freight train. For weeks, she had suspected his involvement, but now, with the evidence laid out before her, bank transfers, hidden accounts, and the names of criminals he had been feeding inside information to, it was undeniable. Patrick had been playing both sides, pulling the strings to ensure the illegal money laundering operation ran smoothly. He was the cancer at the heart of the precinct, and it was time to cut him out. But Patrick wasn't going down without a fight. The moment came in the precinct's locker room, an eerily quiet space where the hum of fluorescent lights echoed like a ticking clock. Mariana knew this was the moment she had to confront him. She walked in, calm, her heart pounding, but her face unreadable. Patrick was at his locker, throwing his uniform into a bag, his back turned to her. "Patrick," she said, her voice steady. He turned, a smirk instantly forming on his face when he saw her standing there. "What now, rookie? Here to teach me something else? Maybe I should start charging you for these lessons." But his smugness was different now. There was an edge to it, a crack in the armor that didn't go unnoticed by Mariana. She was done playing games. She stepped forward, pulling out the evidence she had meticulously gathered. "You've been working with the lobbying group, feeding them intel, helping them launder money through this precinct," Mariana said, her voice unwavering. "I have everything I need to bring you down, Patrick. Your days of hiding behind your badge are over." His face flushed with anger. For a moment, he said nothing, only clenched his fists. His eyes flickered to the door, then back to her. "You don't know who you're dealing with, little girl. You think you've got it all figured out. You think you can touch me." He laughed, a low, mocking sound that made her skin crawl. "You're just a kid, fresh off the boat. No one's gonna believe you over me. I'm the one with the seniority here, the authority." Mariana's gaze didn't waver. She was ready for this moment, had been preparing for it since the first time Patrick had insulted her. His threats meant nothing. Her father had taught her to be fearless, to stand up to the corrupt, no matter how powerful they were. "You're right, Patrick," she said, her voice now cold. "You have seniority, but I've got something you'll never have. I've got the truth." Patrick took a step toward her, his anger bubbling over. "You don't know anything about this system, girl. This is how it works. You're too naive to understand the game." Mariana's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, a new kind of fire sparked in her eyes. "Maybe I don't understand your game, Patrick, but I understand corruption. My father was a whistleblower in South Africa, exposing the same kind of rot that you're feeding into. And because of men like you, he was silenced. They silenced him with violence and lies." The room grew still. Patrick froze, his arrogant sneer faltering for the first time. Mariana's words hit him like a punch to the gut. She could see the realization creeping into his eyes, the slow comprehension that she wasn't just some naive recruit. She had fought corruption her whole life. This wasn't her first battle. "My father didn't back down, and neither will I," she said, her voice quiet but laced with a power that made the air thick. "You can try to intimidate me with your seniority, but it won't work. You've been caught." Patrick's shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, He looked defeated, like a cornered animal. The weight of his own guilt was pressing in on him, and he knew it. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But just as Mariana was about to make her next move, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Patrick's eyes darted toward the door, panic flashing in his gaze. In the blink of an eye, he recovered his composure, wiping the sweat from his brow and straightening up. The moment was gone. Higher-ups, the very ones who had turned a blind eye to his corruption for years, were now stepping into the room. They had arrived too soon, and their presence was enough to stall the confrontation. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything might unravel, like the system would swallow the truth once again. Patrick, sensing the shift, quickly regained his bravado, taking one last look at Mariana. "Good luck with that, rookie," he sneered, before turning away to face the approaching officers. Mariana's pulse raced. She had the evidence, but now she was facing an even greater enemy, the system that protected men like Patrick. As the higher-ups entered the locker room, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The room buzzed with tension, and Mariana knew this battle had only just begun. The tension in the precinct had reached its peak. For weeks, Agent Mariana had fought against more than just corruption. She had fought against a system that wanted to break her, a system that protected its own while trampling over those who stood in the way. But now, with the weight of the truth in her hands, she had the upper hand. In the shadows of the precinct, whispers spread like wildfire. Patrick's arrogance had finally caught up with him. The officers who had once doubted Mariana, those who had followed Patrick's lead, were starting to see the cracks in his armor. The evidence was undeniable, and as the investigation reached its final stages, the truth would not be silenced. Mariana had done the unthinkable. With the help of a few loyal officers who had seen the corruption firsthand, Marcus, Sarah, and even some of the younger recruits who had looked up to Patrick but now recognized the truth, she was able to get the evidence into the hands of the FBI's higher command. It wasn't easy. It took courage, secrecy, and the unyielding will to do what was right. But in the end, the tide turned. The phone call came in the dead of night, and within hours, agents arrived at the precinct. Patrick was arrested, his colleagues in cuffs beside him. The political lobbying group, whose fingers had poisoned the precinct for years, was finally dismantled. The criminals who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes were brought down one by one. But for Mariana, this wasn't just a victory for justice. It was a personal triumph. The precinct was shaken to its core. Officers who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption now found themselves grappling with the reality of what had happened under their noses. They watched in stunned silence as Patrick was led out of the building in handcuffs, his face contorted with fury and disbelief. As he passed Mariana, he shot her one last venomous glare. His eyes burned with hate, but this time there was no malice behind it, just defeat. The once mighty officer who had tried to break her was now a man brought down by his own lies. Mariana didn't flinch. She stood tall, her heart steady. She had won, not by force or violence, but by the power of truth, integrity, and the strength of her spirit. She had faced the darkness head-on, and now the light of justice was shining through. The precinct, once a place of corruption, was now starting to heal. Officers who had been complicit, who had turned a blind eye to the rot, were now standing in awe of Mariana. They had seen firsthand what it meant to fight for what's right, and they had witnessed the strength of a young woman who refused to back down. Mariana was commended for her bravery, her professionalism, and her unwavering commitment to justice. The city's newspapers made her the headline. A new era of justice in the precinct, they said. They hailed the courage of a young black woman who had stood up against a system that had tried to silence her. But for Mariana, the recognition wasn't the goal. It was the people, her people, that mattered. She had exposed the corruption that had plagued their lives, and now they could begin to rebuild. She wasn't just a symbol of change for the precinct. She was a symbol of change for the entire city. In the final moments of the story, as she sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mother back in South Africa. "I am so proud of you, my daughter. You are a beacon of hope. This is just the beginning. Keep fighting for what's right. The world is yours." A soft tear slid down Mariana's cheek as she read the message. In that moment, she felt the weight of her father's legacy, the lessons he had taught her, and the strength of her own journey. She had fought for justice, for the truth, and for the people who needed her the most. This wasn't the end. The world was waiting for her. Thank you for watching this powerful story unfold. We hope it inspired you just as much as it inspired us to create. Before you go, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Kindly like, share, and engage. See you in the next video.